The year is 1492. You are a farmer in the south of Spain. One morning, 3 men in black robes arrive at your door. They don't knock. They don't explain. They simply tell you, you are coming with them. Your neighbors watch from their windows. Nobody says a word. You are taken to a stone building you have passed 100 times but never entered. Inside, it smells of smoke and something else. Something you don't want to name. You will not see sunlight again for months. You will not be told what you are accused of. You will not be allowed to face your accuser. And before this is over, you will confess to things you never did, because that is what the Spanish Inquisition was designed to make you do. History remembers it as a religious institution. The truth is something far darker. Today, we find out what it was really like, and I promise you the real numbers are far worse than anything you learned in school. Before we go further, let's establish what the Spanish Inquisition actually was, because popular culture has turned it into a joke. And that joke has buried something genuinely monstrous. The Spanish Inquisition was established in 1478 by King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain, with the blessing and at the request of Pope Sixtus IV. Its official purpose was to identify and punish heretics, people who claimed to be Christian but secretly practiced other faiths, primarily converted Jews and Muslims. But here is what most people don't understand. The Spanish Inquisition was not a church institution, not entirely. It was a state institution, controlled by the Spanish Crown, funded by the Spanish Crown, and used by the Spanish Crown for purposes that had very little to do with God. It was, in its essence, a political weapon wearing religious clothing. At its head was the Grand Inquisitor. The first and most infamous was a Dominican friar named Tomás de Torquemada. Torquemada is one of history's great monsters, and yet, if you met him you would not have recognized him as one. He was soft-spoken, he was educated, he was deeply, genuinely pious. He believed with absolute certainty that what he was doing was righteous. That certainty is what made him so dangerous, because history's most effective instruments of terror are not the ones who enjoy the suffering. They are the ones who believe the suffering is necessary. Under Torquemada, the Inquisition expanded across all of Spain. It reached into every city, every town, every village. It created a network of informants so extensive that by some estimates, 1 in every 10 Spaniards was reporting on their neighbors. Think about that for a moment. 1 in 10. In your street, in your church, in your family, anyone could accuse you. And the accusation alone was enough to destroy your life. So how did it actually work? The process of the Inquisition was, in a perverse way, extraordinarily systematic. It followed rules, it kept records, it had procedures, and those procedures were designed at every step to make escape impossible. It began with the Edict of Grace. When the Inquisition arrived in a new town, it announced a grace period, typically 30 days. During this time, people could come forward and confess their own heresies voluntarily. Those who did received lighter punishments. This sounds merciful. It was not, because the confession required you to also name everyone you knew who had also strayed from the faith. Your friends, your family, your priest, everyone. So the Edict of Grace didn't just catch heretics, it turned entire communities against each other. In 30 days, the Inquisition had a list of names that would keep it busy for years. After the grace period ended, the arrests began. And here is where it gets deeply disturbing. When you were arrested by the Inquisition, you were not told why. You were not shown the evidence against you. You were not allowed to know who had accused you. You simply disappeared into a cell. The cells of the Inquisition were not the dramatic dungeons of film. They were small, cold, dark. You received food and water, enough to keep you alive. You were not physically abused yet. The psychological torture came first. You were left alone, for days, sometimes weeks, with no information, no contact, no idea what was going to happen. And then, the questioning began. The inquisitors were not stupid men. They were educated, trained, patient. They asked the same questions again and again, over multiple sessions, sometimes weeks apart, looking for inconsistencies, looking for slips, looking for the one detail that would crack your story. They didn't need to threaten you, not immediately. The process itself was the threat, because everyone who entered an Inquisition cell knew what came next, if they didn't confess, and that knowledge was often enough. Let's talk about the torture, because this is where the popular mythology diverges most dramatically from reality. The Monty Python sketch Nobody Expects the Spanish Inquisition turned it into comedy. Comfortable chairs, soft cushions, the joke being that their instruments of torture were ridiculous. The reality was not ridiculous. The Inquisition used 3 primary methods of torture. All 3 were standard across medieval Europe. The Inquisition didn't invent them, but they applied them with a systematic efficiency that was uniquely their own. The first was the strappado. You were bound at the wrists behind your back. Then you were hoisted into the air by a rope attached to your wrists. This put your arms in a position the human body was never designed to sustain. The pain was immediate and extreme. Then, you were dropped, not to the floor, But partway, the sudden stop, the jerk of the rope would dislocate your shoulders. Sometimes both. Inquisition records show this was the most commonly used method. It left marks but rarely permanent damage, which was by design. The Inquisition had rules. Torture could not draw blood, could not cause permanent injury, and could not be repeated more than once per accusation. Those rules sound humane. They were not. They were procedural. They existed so the Inquisition could claim it was being merciful, while still breaking people. The second method was the toca, or waterboarding. Yes, waterboarding. In 1478, you were bound to a board, tilted with your head down. A cloth was placed over your face. Water was poured slowly onto the cloth. The sensation is of drowning. The body cannot distinguish between the sensation and the reality. Modern military psychologists who have studied waterboarding describe it as one of the most psychologically effective torture methods ever developed. It breaks people extremely quickly. The third was the garrucha, a variation of the strapado, but with weights attached to the feet while you were hoisted. These three methods, used systematically, methodically, following a strict procedure, were enough. The confession rate under torture was nearly 100%. But here is the darkest detail of all. Under Inquisition procedure, a confession obtained under torture was not considered valid. You had to confirm it freely, the next day, without torture, and almost everyone did, because they knew that if they retracted their confession, the torture would simply resume. There was no escape. The process was a closed loop designed so that once you entered it, the only way out was through. So people confessed to things they hadn't done, named people who hadn't done anything, and the list grew, and the arrests continued. The machine fed itself. After the confession came the sentencing, and the sentencing was, in itself, an act of theater, the auto da fe, the act of faith. These were public ceremonies, sometimes lasting an entire day, in which the condemned were paraded through the streets, wearing a special garment called the San Benito, a yellow robe marked with flames and demons, so everyone could see who they were, what they had done. The crowds came in their thousands. The auto da fe was not a solemn occasion. It was an event, a spectacle. Families brought food. Children climbed onto walls to see better. It was, in the most disturbing sense of the word, entertainment. The punishments ranged along a spectrum. At the lighter end, penances, fines, the wearing of the San Benito publicly for years, which sounds survivable, but the San Benito destroyed lives. Your neighbors knew, your employer knew, your family knew. Some people hanged themselves rather than face it. In the middle, imprisonment, confiscation of all property, which meant your family was left with nothing, which in 15th century Spain was a death sentence spread across years. At the extreme end, the stake. But here is something that surprises most people. The Inquisition itself did not execute people. It had no legal authority to kill. Instead, it handed condemned prisoners to the secular authorities, with a formal request that they be treated with mercy. Everyone knew this was fiction. The secular authorities invariably burned them. But this procedural formality allowed the Inquisition to say truthfully that it had never killed anyone. The total number burned at the stake under the Spanish Inquisition is debated by historians. The most rigorous modern estimate based on surviving records is between 3,000 and 5,000 people. 3,000 to 5,000. That number often surprises people. They expected more. They've heard figures of millions, and those figures are wrong. The Spanish Inquisition was not the Holocaust, but 3,000 to 5,000 people burned alive over 3.5 centuries is not a small number. It is 3,000 to 5,000 individual human beings who died in agony in front of cheering crowds. The number doesn't make it less monstrous, it just makes it more precise. So who were the victims? The original targets were the conversos, Jews who had converted to Christianity often under threat of death, but who were suspected of secretly maintaining Jewish practices. This is one of the most psychologically disturbing aspects of the whole institution. These people had converted. They had done exactly what they were told to do. They had renounced their faith, taken Christian names, raised their children in the church, and still, it wasn't enough. Because the Inquisition operated on the concept of limpieza de sangre, purity of blood, the idea that Jewish or Muslim ancestry was itself a form of contamination that conversion could not cleanse. This is in its structure identical to the racial ideology of the 20th century. Different vocabulary, same logic. The Inquisition eventually expanded its reach far beyond conversos. It prosecuted Protestants, who began appearing in Spain after the Reformation. It prosecuted Muslims who had converted, the Moriscos. It prosecuted people accused of witchcraft, of blasphemy, of reading forbidden books. It prosecuted people for owning a Bible in Spanish, because the Inquisition had decided that ordinary people reading scripture for themselves was dangerous. It prosecuted people for smiling when the Virgin Mary's name was mentioned, for bathing too frequently, which was considered a Jewish practice, for not eating pork. That last one, not eating pork, sent people to torture chambers. The accusations were often grotesque in their triviality, and that was the point. When any behavior can be heresy, everyone is a potential heretic. And when everyone is a potential heretic, everyone is afraid. Fear was the product. The trials and the burnings were just the advertising. The Spanish Inquisition lasted in various forms for 356 years. It was not officially abolished until 1834. 356 years. How does an institution that tortured and killed thousands of people survive for that long? The answer is not religion. Religion was the justification. The reason it survived was simpler and darker: money and power. When the Inquisition convicted someone, their property was confiscated, split between the crown, the church, and the Inquisition itself. In its most active periods, the Spanish Inquisition was enormously profitable. The wealthiest converso families, merchants, bankers, physicians, were disproportionately targeted, not because they were more heretical, but because their wealth was more valuable. The Inquisition also served as a mechanism of political control. Powerful families that the crown wanted weakened could suddenly find themselves accused. Rivals of important officials, intellectuals who asked inconvenient questions, anyone who had accumulated too much influence. The accusation itself was the punishment. Even if you were acquitted, and some were, the process had destroyed your reputation, exhausted your resources, and made your name permanently suspect. Not because it was extraordinarily effective at maintaining the power of the people who controlled it. It was not a religious institution. It was a protection racket with a crucifix on the wall. The Spanish Inquisition ended in 1834, but its legacy did not wane. The concept of limpieza de sangre, blood purity, that it institutionalized did not disappear with the institution. It traveled to the colonies Spain was building in the Americas, to the racial theories that would crystallize in the 19th century, to ideologies that the 20th century made catastrophic. The Inquisition did not cause the Holocaust, but the logic it normalized, that ancestry determines guilt, that difference is contamination, that the state has the right to reach into private belief, that logic did not die in 1834. The Inquisition also left something more immediate. In Spain, in Latin America, in the Philippines, its records survive. Millions of pages of testimony, confession, and judgment. A detailed archive of fear. Historians who read these documents don't find monsters and victims. They find ordinary people, the accusers and the accused, doing what ordinary people do under extraordinary pressure, surviving, protecting themselves, betraying others to save their families, which is perhaps the most disturbing thing of all. The Spanish Inquisition didn't require monsters to function. It required ordinary people who were afraid, and gave them a system that rewarded that fear. That system is the monster, not the people inside it. And systems like that have a habit of returning. So, the Spanish Inquisition, not the joke, not the comfortable chairs and soft cushions. 356 years, thousands burned, hundreds of thousands imprisoned, tortured, broken, an entire society living under a system where any neighbor could destroy any life with a single accusation, built not on faith, but on fear, and money, and power, and run not by monsters, but by ordinary people who had been given extraordinary permission. The thing that haunts me most about this story is not the torture chambers. It's the crowds at the auto da fe, the families with their food, the children on the walls, the cheering, because those people were not evil, they were ordinary, and somehow, that is worse. If you found this video, the next one in this series covers the Plague Doctor, the real story of the Black Death, what it was actually like to live through the worst pandemic in human history, and the men in beaked masks who walked into it anyway. That video is already up. Before you go, tell me in the comments, after watching this, do you think something like the Inquisition could happen today? I read every single comment. This is Dark Chronicles. History isn't what they taught you.